The Person Controller, written and read by David Baddiel. To the grandmas, Sarah and Dinks, late of this parish. Part 1. Pause. Chapter 1. Fred and Ellie. Fred and Ellie Stone were twins, but they were never sure whether or not they could call themselves identical. They certainly shared exactly the same birthday, 20th of September, 11 years ago, and they had the same mum and dad, Eric and Janine. But their names were Fred and Ellie, and a boy and girl are clearly not identical. Footnote 1. A boy and girl can only be fraternal twins, never identical, but don't ask me to explain the difference. It's a bit yucky. Yet they felt identical. They sometimes even felt that they knew what one another were thinking. And even if they were 200 metres apart, they could mouth words at each other and always know what the other one was saying. They did look pretty identical too. They both wore glasses, and most of the time their school uniforms, even though uniform wasn't compulsory at their school. And they both, at the point at which this story begins, had braces on their top teeth. They also both liked the same things. These included superheroes, Japanese fantasy animation films, comics, maths. Yes, they actually liked maths. Sometimes they played a game called Who Can Name More Decimal Places of Pi? And most importantly, video games. All video games, but their favourites were FIFA, Street Fighter, Super Mario and Minecraft. The one thing they would save up their not very much pocket money to buy was the most up-to-date versions of these games. Ellie, though, was better than Fred at video games. Footnote 2. Fred was better than her at one thing, however, customising the avatars. He could customise any avatar on any game so the character on screen looked great. Hairstyle, eye colour, skin colour, clothes, teeth, every shape and size. Fred sometimes wondered if he didn't like doing that even more than playing the games. Which Fred didn't mind, Ellie being better at video games, that is. He knew she had quicker fingers and better hand-to-eye coordination. And even though he sometimes got frustrated at losing, other times he just liked watching her fingers speed across her controller, as if she was playing a classical concerto by heart. And when I say her controller, I mean her controller. Ellie and Fred always used their own ones. Ellie, in particular, was always very definite about which one was hers. The feel and the weight of her controller, even if, to the untrained eye-stroke-hand, both of them may have looked-stroke-felt exactly the same, suited her style perfectly. Which was why what happened to it was quite so upsetting. Chapter 2. Eric. Eric Stone was, there is no nice way of saying this, fat. Well, there are nice ways of saying it, and Eric did often use these ways, describing himself as big-boned, or portly, or suffering from terrible water retention. But the truth was, he was fat, because he ate too much. He didn't have terrible water retention, he had terrible bacon sandwich retention. To be fair to Eric, he did, normally after a bit of prompting from his wife, Janine, and his children, Fred and Ellie, go on a lot of diets. He'd been on the high-fibre diet, and the low-carb diet, and the juice diet, and the no-juice diet, and the cabbage soup diet, and the pea and mint soup diet, and a diet he made up where he only ate banana muffins and cheese. He'd been on the 5-2 diet, and the 6-1 diet, and the 4-3 diet, and the 2-5 diet, and even the 17-28 diet, which meant not eating anything for a minute between 17:27 and 17:29 every day. He'd been to Weight Watchers, and Chocoholics Anonymous, and 16 Stoners Self-Help, and big-boned portly bacon sandwich retenters sit around in a circle and say how it isn't really their fault. Actually, this last one was what Janine called all Eric's diet groups. Trouble was, the diets didn't make Eric any lighter. If anything, they made him heavier, because every time he finished one, and he did always finish them, normally after only 4 or 5 days, he would eat about 5 times his own weight in bacon sandwiches. Footnote 3. It didn't help that Eric worked for a supermarket as a retail manager, whatever that is. I should know, I know, but I don't. I've never known what jobs called things like that actually involve. This meant the Stones got large discounts on all their food, especially bacon, and Eric brought home so much of that he got a discount on his discount. Eric was just tucking into a bacon sandwich, the first one he'd had after giving up on the jacket potato skin diet, which he'd followed for 2 whole days. It allowed you to eat jacket potato skins, and you could put low-fat spread on them, which Eric had decided included mayonnaise, when the thing that happened to Ellie's controller, which was so upsetting, happened. Footnote 4. I'm aware that there are 2 uses of the word happened very close together here. Don't let it worry you. The bacon sandwich, in a way, was what caused the whole thing. Because whenever Eric Stone had his first bacon sandwich after a diet, he would become so entranced by the fatty saltiness of the pork rashers and how deliciously it sat against the brown sauce-smeared white bread that he would forget everything else and close his eyes. He would lose himself in that bacon sandwich. Unfortunately, the point at which he was losing himself in this particular bacon sandwich was also the point at which he was sitting down on the sofa in front of the TV, plate in one hand, sandwich in the other, in his pants. His big, grey, bought in 1987, Y-front pants. He'd been planning to open his eyes shortly and watch TV, but not for a little while, not until he'd really savoured the saltiness. Not until... Ow! Said Eric, opening his eyes very wide. What is it? Said Janine, not bothering to turn away from Cash in the Attic. Janine Stone never missed an episode and was convinced that one day she herself would find something in the attic worth millions of pounds, which was odd, as the Stone family lived in a ground-floor flat. I've sat on something, Jay, said Eric. Well, move off it then, said Janine, still looking at the screen while stroking the family cat, a white fluffy beast called Margaret Scratcher. I can't. You can't. I think it's stuck. Eric stood up. He turned round, facing away from his wife. Interestingly, despite the obvious pain he was in, at no point did he stop eating his bacon sandwich. Can you see it? He said. What do you mean, can I see it? He glanced over his shoulder. Stop watching Cash in the Attic just for a second. With a big tut, Janine Stone forced her eyes away from the television and looked across Margaret Scratcher's fur at her husband's back. Then she lowered her gaze a fraction. What's that? She said. What's what? That black thing poking out of your pants. That's what I want to know, said Eric. Never mind it poking out, it's poking me. There was another tut from behind him. Eric had once admitted, quietly, to his friends in his works canteen over a bacon sandwich, that if his wife was a noise, she would be a tut. For pity's sake, Eric, bend over. Eric did as he was told. There was a short pause as Janine and Margaret Scratcher peered. Eric felt he could hear them peering. Then she said, How on earth did you get that stuck up there? How on earth did I get what stuck up there? My video game controller, said another voice. Ellie's voice, in fact, sounding very upset. Reasonably, really, since she had just come into the living room to see her mother reaching out a slightly disgusted hand to retrieve her most prized possession from between the cheeks of her father's 1987 Y-front panted bottom. Chapter 3. Cyber Dodo. As it happened, Ellie's controller wasn't actually broken. The toggle had gone a touch floppy, and the X button looked like it had been knocked diagonal by whatever G-force it sustained while between Eric's bottom cheeks. But it worked, kind of, if you ignored the fact that when it shuddered, like controllers do when you hit the bar in FIFA or there's an explosion in Call of Duty, it felt to Ellie like it was shuddering for another reason, the reason being that it had been lost for a short while in a very bad place. Basically, Ellie just didn't really want to touch her beloved controller anymore, which everyone in the family, including Eric, understood. In fact, Eric, who was a nice person and a good dad, even if he loved bacon sandwiches almost as much as his children, went so far as to tell Ellie that he was perfectly willing to pay for a new controller, as long as she didn't tell anyone what had happened to the old one. The day after Eric made that promise, Fred and Ellie were in their school computer room. Well, it wasn't really a computer room. Bracketwood Comprehensive was a good school, more or less, but it didn't have any money. And so what it called a computer room was in fact a cleaning cupboard with all the cleaning materials taken out and an 8-year-old laptop on the shelf where there used to be 5 half-full bottles of toilet duck. However, Fred and Ellie didn't mind, because right then they were enjoying going through all their favourite gaming sites and reading reviews of all the latest controllers. Ellie, in particular, was really enjoying herself. People who aren't gamers don't know this, do they? She was saying. They think that controllers just come in black plastic with some buttons bundled with a console, but they're so wrong. Look! Fred, who tended just to listen when Ellie got very excited about anything to do with gaming, nodded. She was right. Clicking quickly through many different web pages, her skill at video games showing in how expert she also was with a mouse, she pulled up on the screen loads of different types of controller. Black ones, grey ones, silver ones, rainbow ones, camouflage ones, football team colours ones. Ones with big toggles, small toggles, toggles that were gear sticks and steering wheels. Controllers with blue lights and white lights and red lights and yellow lights, with ribbed handles and smooth handles and leather-clad handles and handles shaped like hands, with headphones and microphones and speakers attached, and ones you could personalise yourself. You could even have one made in the shape of your own name. The 2 L's in Ellie could be the handles, she said excitedly. Yes, said Fred, wondering how that would work with Fred. Maybe if he went for Frederick, the K and the D could be the handles. But then again, Frederick was probably a bit long for a video game controller. He'd have to hold his hands really wide apart. What browser are you using? Said their sort of friend Sterling, one of the few other pupils of Bracketwood who could often be found in the computer room. He was standing behind Ellie, peering at the screen. Browser, said Ellie, not turning round. I don't know. Safari? Sterling looked at his younger sister, Scarlett. They burst out laughing. Safari! Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, they said together. Ellie raised her eyes at Fred, who raised his own back. Sterling and Scarlett were very technologically aware and very proud of it. This was one reason why, as far as Fred and Ellie were concerned, they were sort of friends rather than friends. Footnote 5. Another reason was their challenging hair. Sterling and Scarlett's mum had recently married a new husband who was a hairdresser. His name was Mr. Bodzarov, and his proud motto was, I cut hair, including his stepchildren's, like they used to in the old country. I'll leave you to imagine what this means. Is that wrong? Said Ellie, about the safari thing. Well, it's not wrong, but if you want to be truly up to speed, said Sterling. Both design-wise and speed-wise, said Scarlett. As in download speed, she added helpfully. Then I think we would suggest, wouldn't we, Scarlett? Scarlett nodded eagerly. Allegro, she said. Quick Smart, Pro Tickle, Internet Wingding, Paloma's World, Browser with 3 Zs. All great, said Sterling, but for me, top of the browser tree has to be at this moment in time Cyberdodo. Oh, of course, Cyberdodo. Never heard of it, said Ellie. Where does it say that? Twitter, said Fred. Twitter? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, they went. What are you, a pensioner? Added Sterling. No, Cyberdodo is what everyone recommends on Instant Gone, said Scarlett. Whizstream, Quack, FaceTunnel, Pinteresting enough, Dirkad Poodlek. Sterling shook his head. Chat Whiskers. Chat Whiskers, of course. Ellie, who had continued to stare at the screen while all this was going on, turned round at last. Sterling, Scarlett, can I ask you a question? Are you even on social media? They looked at each other, then shook their heads. Are you, in fact, even allowed to use a computer without your parents' supervision? Sterling and Scarlett looked at each other again, then shook their heads. Our mum says we can when we're in year 5, said Scarlett quietly. This was the other reason that Sterling and Scarlett were only sort of friends. They were in years 3 and 2. They were 8 and 7. OK, babies, said Ellie, turning back round to the computer. Then perhaps some of your recommendations can wait. At least until, well. This wasn't said by Sterling or Scarlett. In fact, when Ellie and Fred turned round, Sterling and Scarlett had vanished. Standing there instead were the other twins in the school, Isla and Maurice Fawcett. Oh no, said Fred.